before I get started, my name is Yumi. I'm BGV's operations manager, and I lead on BGV's impact and support our companies with their impact management and reporting. I thought I would start off like quite basic, so excuse me if you already know this, but I think it's important to have the definitions right. So for us, as for other investors, impact is a change in an outcome caused by an organization. So we think every business, every investment has an impact, but by no means is it always positive or intentional. So essentially what we're trying to figure out by the process of impact measurement is whether our investments are performing in line with our expectations, i.e. are they creating positive, measurable social or environmental change alongside a financial return? At this point, as a founder, you might be wondering why I'm telling you this. It sounds very investor focused. I think impact data is something that's really unique to Tech for Good and to impact businesses. And apart from enabling you to have better conversations during your fundraising process, I think there are many ways that you can integrate it to develop products, to do your sales, marketing, hiring, and essentially like any part of your business. So I'm sure our panelists today will have many stories about how impact data has helped them. And just to hone in a bit more on BGV and how we think about impact, the way that we ensure that impact is integrated throughout our operations is, first of all, by ensuring that we invest in companies that bake impact into their business model. So what that means is that we want companies that where essentially, the more they sell, the more impact they should be generating. And on a fund level, that means that we want to see businesses that in 8 to 10 years' time can be worth over £100 million and be positively impacting the lives of millions of people. So for us, the commercial and the impact metrics are really closely related to each other. We sit broadly across 3 themes. They are sustainable planet, a better society, and healthy lives. They are broad on purpose. It's not because we can't decide, but rather because we think that some of the most complex challenges today, like climate change, societal inequalities, poor health outcomes, and many others, probably won't be solved by any one type of solution. So essentially what we want to do is invest broadly to try and tackle these problems from different angles. And hopefully together they can all kind of work towards systemic change. I'm going to stop here, and I know we're going to go into more detail into the specific frameworks and metrics later, but I'm going to hand over to our venture partner, Yumi.
Hello all, I'm Yumi. See some people that are familiar people in the chat and the attendees list. So lovely to see you all. I'm one of the venture partners here at BGV, and today, as Dharma mentioned earlier, I'll be in discussion with this amazing panel around kind of impact measurement. And we thought it would be interesting to see it from kind of both sides, right? So we've kind of got founders and impact investors to kind of go through and have a discussion with them around where they see impact measurement from and what they're doing. And so I'm going to leave it to the panelists themselves to introduce themselves. But also panelists, when you do introduce yourselves, could you also share with the attendees today what specific problem or issue your company or organization is addressing and the impact that you hope to achieve through your organization? So let's kick off. Maybe we go for, we'll start off with our founders. And Ella, would you be able to kick us off, please?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Aela Callan. I am co-founder of Headset. We are a company that's providing immersive technologies to integrate with hostile environment training in order to help people who go to the front line, such as journalists, humanitarians, or aid workers, practice in a safe space where mistakes are free. The problem that we're solving is that it's very often too dangerous or too expensive or frankly impossible to train for some of the hostile environments that people we work with are going into. Think about, for example, the Turkey-Syria earthquake or the war in Ukraine. And so we are hoping to strengthen both in terms of safety and saving lives, the people who go into those zones. So we're we're strengthening democratic institutions, societally important workers.
Thank you. Andre, tell us a little more about yourself and Beautiful Voice.
So hi, I'm Andre. I'm a biomedical engineer, and Beautiful Voice is a startup from the University of Oxford. We're modernizing speech and language therapy delivery, and our aim is to help adults with neurological conditions to improve their communication abilities while making the lives of speech and language therapists easier. So there are about 80 million people worldwide with neurological conditions who suffer from communication difficulties. And this can be stroke survivors or people with Parkinson's. And these issues affect their lives in several ways. So some of them are going to have a really quiet voice. So when they're in a pub or restaurant, people can't hear them at all. Some are going to have speech issues. So their speech is slurred or hoarse. And some people, they have really stigmatizing situations. Like people think they're drunk when they're talking, but they're just talking normally from their perspective. And others are going to have language issues. So they really get stuck trying to express themselves. So their vocabulary might be only a dozen words. And as you can imagine, this really affects their lives because they lose the ability to live independently, they can't work, and they can't even take part in social activities very well. So speech and language therapy can be really helpful for them, but it needs to be long-term and high intensity, and there are just not enough healthcare resources to enable that. So we're using technology to create a platform where people can train at home using AI to help them identify their difficulties and suggest training. And we're creating interactive interest-based exercises so they can feel that that's not just a chore, it's something that they can do regularly to achieve that high intensity, long-term speech therapy.
Thank you, Andre. And Grant, tell us a little more about yourself and Tranquil City, please.
Hi everyone, my name's Grant Waters. I'm a founder of Tranquil City. We're an environmental data and knowledge company. The problem we're addressing is that cities are growing rapidly, and they're a key aspect to promoting sustainable environments around the world. However, cities aren't really designed or suited to healthy environments for people and nature. So we look at transforming the way we live and design cities to promote healthy lives for people and nature. So we do two things. We're experts in multidisciplinary environmental factors such as soundscapes, air quality, environmental psychology, and sustainable development. We digest quite complex information to help inform designs that can promote such healthy environments. And we also use data to try and help disseminate that and scale that in terms of how people and designers can implement healthier city aspects into cities around the world. So we measure our impact in a number of ways, and we've sort of still in development of that. We track people in terms of how many people our interventions have reached, whether that's data or tech integrations or engagement activities. And we also look at more granular assessments as well in terms of before and after studies to really help back up. When we say we've reached someone, we need to say, well, we've also got evidence to suggest that our interventions are worthwhile. But we're also looking at how we can track our data and our impact in relation to the UN SDGs.
Amazing. You guys are doing loads, aren't you, over there? So those were our founders. And now over to our impact investor experts here. So Louise, tell us a little bit more about yourself and Resolution Ventures, please.
Yeah, I'm Louise Marston. I'm the Director of Ventures at the Resolution Foundation. So we are best known as an independent think tank that focuses on improving living standards for those on low to middle incomes. And I lead our social investment work, which is focused particularly on improving low paid and precarious work. So there are about 10 million people in the UK that are in low paid work or in precarious work of different sorts. We define low pay as being about 2/3 of the median income, which is roughly equivalent to about to less than £20,000 a year. in earnings. And precarious work can look like different things, but it's usually characterized by very variable income. So coming from unpredictable hours or from unpredictable kind of contract self-employment and things like that. So we set out to invest in ventures that are usually in technology and data to improve the world of work in different ways. And we sort of bucket those improvements in work into different areas. So we think about ways in which we can improve people's pay, just getting their earnings up in different ways, or helping them to kind of be more financially resilient, improving their kind of prospects. So how do you help people access training and skills and the opportunity to progress in their careers and access different routes to improving their pay over time? We think about power, your agency, your ability to influence your working conditions, your ability to have choices about work, and then well-being. So what's your experience of work? You know, what's the nature of the work you're doing? How do you experience it? So we look for ventures that are trying to have impact in those areas, and often they are impacting more than one of those. So if you can improve people's pay, it will also improve their well-being. If you can improve people's prospects and their ability to kind of progress, they're likely to improve their pay as well. So they're often linked, so it's hard to separate them into neat categories. But we've been building that over the last couple of years, working with Beckenhall Green Ventures as well, and working together on some of the ventures and investing directly as well. And so the problem we're trying to solve is really that a lot of low paid work is really difficult, really stressful, and doesn't come with the kind of pay and compensations that other stressful jobs will come with. And the gap we saw was that there wasn't a lot of people using technology and data to improve that work. There are lots of technology tools. If you're based at a desk all day and you want to kind of be more efficient, you want to collaborate more, you want to figure out how to do your work better, there's loads of tools and loads of startups out there serving you. But for deskless workers, people who are doing frontline work or in low paid work, there aren't many people who are developing tools that are really going to benefit them. A lot of technology is done to workers in those categories rather than being used by them to improve what's going on. So that's the gap we saw, and that's the type of impact that we're trying to have.
Thank you. And last but by no means least, Yumi.
Yeah, so I think I already gave a bit of an introduction to myself from BGV, but yeah, kind of very happy to kind of maybe go into some of the questions so that we can kind of go into anything I said in more detail.
Sure, let's do that then. So actually, while we have you here, Yumi, we've got let's start some questions off, which are for the investors. Then we'll got some questions for the founders. And some of these questions have come in from those who have registered for the event as well. And feel free to start putting questions in the chat if you do have any more. We've got a space for that later. But let's start off with a question for the investors on the panel with how do you assess impact in potential ventures?
I think it's a really interesting question. I think everyone's trying to understand what's the best way of doing that. But the way that we do it is we essentially have a different set of criteria depending on the fundraising stage of the company. So it kind of intuitively makes sense to us that if you're a company that has only existed for 2 weeks or 2 months, we'd have a very different set of expectations versus if you existed, say, for like 5 years. So we take a stage-based approach. At the very kind of earliest stages, when we first thinking about making an investment, we are looking at your kind of target users, your understanding of the problem and the potential kind of degree of change that your solution might generate. At this point, we're not really expecting like masses of data. We're still looking at your kind of hypotheses and like how much you have researched and you know, your problem area and how do you actually know that it's important to your users. But as you progress, we'll start kind of making those criteria a bit more sophisticated. So we'll start looking at more specific data around your users, your change, your unintended consequences, and how you might potentially be mitigating them, any kind of impact risks, and also your kind of contribution. So we try to understand like what change would have happened if your solution didn't exist, and that's often quite hard for early stage companies, but we support wherever we can. And at Series A, it's very much about just like validating the impacts at scale and making sure that it is really replicable, measurable, and systematic. So at that point, we often see companies work with external third parties like universities or sometimes kind of corporate clients to essentially try and validate the impact that they are creating.
Wow, amazing. Louise, how about yourselves?
Yeah, I guess kind of similar things. We most often invest at pre-seed, so pre-revenue, but often pre-product as well. So at that stage, when we're assessing something ahead of investment, we're mostly looking for just alignment with mission with the founders. Do they are they committed to the problem? Do they have a really good understanding of or experience of the problem that they're trying to target? Do we feel that problem is important for the kind of groups of people that we care about, that it's relevant and that actually solving it will make a difference? It's sometimes you see someone solving a problem over here, but actually the real problem to be tackled is over there. So like, is solving that problem actually going to improve people's lives from a kind of social impact point of view? So a lot of it is just about alignment and an understanding of the problem at that investment stage. And then post-investment is about supporting the way in which that can be measured. So figuring out then how you help them assess progress against that goal and the objectives. So theory of change is really helpful for us. We don't require people to come with one, but it's helpful if they've thought through some of that. And it's certainly post-investment, it's something that's really useful in terms of figuring out which stages you might want to measure, what are the different bits of the puzzle that you can influence that you can then think about assessing. So that's a really useful tool to have a kind of conversation with the founder about where they think the impact's going to happen, what are the different things that are going to lead towards that outcome happening over time, and how you can kind of step the process towards it. And kind of checking the logic of that is sort of part of the investment process, but it'll depend how well developed that is at the point of investment to how much you kind of interrogate that.
Well, that's amazing. I love the way that you describe how you use the theory of change in the way that you kind of make these decisions. It's really, really quite nice. I've got some questions for the founders on the panel. And we'll maybe we kick off with Andre, then Grant, and then Aela. And the question here is, how did you learn about the problem that you're solving, and what outcomes and users are you targeting with your solution? So, Andre.
So, I still am a researcher in biomedical engineering, and I was actually developing technologies for adults with neurological conditions. And I kept meeting them, and I realized, oh, they also have this speech and language problem that wasn't actually my initial focus. And I had the opportunity to talk to a speech and language therapist, and she was really excited to talk to me because she felt there was really a gap there. And then I noticed how little technology was being developed to solve that problem. So it was both about how big the problem was for the affected communities, but also how little is being developed for that. So I saw there was a big gap there, and it could make a big difference on that. So our target are, as I said before, people with Parkinson's and stroke survivors, and what we want to do is to be able to help them regain their independence and their ability to socialize. But there are a few other stakeholders too that we want to affect. So the family members, so it can be a bit less of a burden of having to act as a caregiver for so much of their time. And for speech and language therapists to be able to deliver a better service and for more people. So we really want to measure if using our technology, they can treat more people too.
Thank you. Grant?
So we discovered sort of the problem through our own sort of work in consultancy, and where we are sort of identifying that a lot of the information and knowledge that we held as consultants in various disciplines was not being translated into sort of real world practical applications. We've sort of found that a lot of environmental data is complicated and people don't really know what to do with it, much the same as other data sets. It's really about how that data is made useful as opposed to just produced. And a lot of the environmental data we're seeing was being produced for assessment of exposure and sort of negative impacts, but we were saying, well, why can't we use that data to really promote positive change and positive interaction with our environments. So we're finding that, you know, for example, all the data on air quality is never integrated into apps that, for example, can promote behavior change or promote decisions to be made about where you go and take, you know, where you visit, how you get across town, those sort of things, in a way that's comprehensive and universal across cities around the world. So we found that was really how we discovered it through our own work and coming together through this mission around how we can really help promote that knowledge transfer plus the sort of holistic aggregation of data sets in ways that people can actually implement them in tech and in real world interventions was really our driver. I mean, in terms of the beneficiaries, we split users and beneficiaries together into two different categories. Typically, our customers are local governments or city governments, and then we also have app and API users for our data. But our beneficiaries are mainly just city dwellers, and it's quite broad. And we've always struggled a little bit in terms of identifying specific beneficiary groups, because generally it's just for people who live in cities. So that's one thing that we find still struggle with sometimes.
Thank you. And Aela.
Yeah, so I learned about the problem that we're solving through personal experience. Both my co-founder Kate and I were frontline journalists for many years, working in natural disasters, war zones, civil unrest. And we really wanted to find a solution that would be that would enable our colleagues and people who we were working with to access really world-class training very easily and on demand. Part of the problem that we've been solving for is that these hostile environment courses that journalists and aid workers are generally sent on, you know, they're 5 days, they're outside of the office, and they're very expensive. So our theory of change, if you like, is all around making this training more accessible by doing it on demand and making, you know, scenario-based training available to meet people wherever they are, in their living rooms or boardrooms or newsrooms, etc. In terms of the outcomes that we're looking for, I mean, obviously, because we're looking at accessibility, we track things like numbers, we track Net Promoter Score, and then related to the training, we have very specific metrics that we look at around whether we're creating the kind of behaviour change that we want. So the 3 tenets of our training are around safety and security. So we track things like situational awareness and how much people are aware of their surroundings while they're in these scenarios. In terms of medical, we track things like skill fade because we're trying to prevent people from losing the skills. If you don't practice them, you lose them very quickly. So allowing them to repeat and reduce skill fade. And then in terms of resilience and how well they are in their minds and how strong they are in their minds to prepare for the kinds of things that they're facing, we track things like tactical stress de-escalation techniques. So, you know, how well you can de-escalate your stress levels in a really high stress situation. So in terms of long-term change, we track that, you know, in the moment in the training, but we also then have follow-up surveys later with people. And because we're working with a nascent technology, virtual reality, we also are looking for a lot of unintended consequences and things that we try to mitigate against as well.
Thank you. So we've got some questions for the whole panel now, so we can kind of see from both sides, from an investor side as well as a founder side. And the question I have for you all is, what are you doing or have done to ensure that you or the organization stays true to the mission that you're on? Let's start with Yumi.
So I think we, as part of our like investment process, we actually ask all of our companies to include a purpose clause in their articles of association. And we actually do the same kind of within BGV as well. So we are a B Corp, certified B Corp, kind of as part of the process we had to make sure that our kind of legal documents essentially enable kind of a mission-driven kind of company. Apart from that, we make sure that we screen investments at the start. So the screening process for us is really important. So we only invest in companies that work across tech for good. And the beginning of that for us ensures we kind of do the relevant due diligence. We ask lots of questions to make sure that the impact our founders are trying to create is indeed going to be kind of positive and intentional. So I think these are probably the kind of fundamental starting points for us.
Great. And that's from a kind of an investor perspective. Aela, could we have, how about headset, and how do you do that?
I'm going to give you a really honest answer.
Please.
Probably the biggest thing that we've done to ensure that we are creating the impact that we really want was to be very clear-eyed about who we took on as investors. So when you go out to fundraise, you get pulled in 100 different directions by people who want you to speed up, by people who want you to do more. And we actually, in some cases, left money on the table because the people that, you know, were going to put money into the company weren't aligned with us in terms of the strategy that we wanted to the company to follow. And so particularly when you're working with technologies, there is, you know, this idea that you need to be mining the data and you need to be monetizing everything that you can. And yes, absolutely, you need to, you know, as you know, to maintain your impact, you need to be profitable, and you need to be, you know, generating revenue, and you need to be sustainable as the number one thing. But also your partners that you take on when you do that will very much determine the trajectory that you take. So probably, investment decisions were the biggest thing that we made to ensure that we stay on track with our impact.
Thank you. Grant, over to you.
Mute. So I think I can hopefully give also an honest opinion as well, or experience. I think that one of the biggest things that Aela, you mentioned was about that balance between monetary and impact sort of driven drives, essentially, and the push and pull that they have in relation to each other. And I think one of the biggest things that we've or the most impactful things that we've done ourselves to try and keep us aligned to our mission is about having very regular strategic sort of plans, like updates. So like every year we would get together and really plan out what we want to achieve in the next year. I know that seems fairly obvious, but it's important for us to treat it in the same way that we would normally treat for a business about profit margins, or, you know, other monetary metrics. So I think we put that on equal par, and it means that sometimes we potentially push impact higher than monetary gains. And that's sometimes a bit of our limiting factor, which I think that that's a spectrum in terms of where you sit in terms of impact and sustainable business or revenue generating business. I think that's a really important question to ask yourselves as a founder, because we're constantly asking ourselves that, because we sometimes get pushed in a way that we are driving impact at all expense, potentially affecting revenue, and on the opposite sides too. So where we dragged into projects where we're getting revenue, but we're not aligning to our mission. So I think having those regular check-ins with ourselves as a team is really, really important, and to set that out quite clearly in our strategies. Great,
thank you. Andre.
So as a healthcare startup for us, I think the influence from the patients is really important. So we regularly meet with our patient and care advisors, and we try to be really transparent about what's our end goal and where we are right now and the steps that we're taking to get there, and we really listen to their advice. I think that they are quite honest, and they can be quite spot on when we are not actually moving towards the goal. I think in addition to that, we also have academic advisors, and they have similar goals and have had decades of experience in the field. And they really help make sure that our research and clinical validation are solid and to high standards to help steer our company to creating something that is actually obtaining the impact that we want, so that is actually helping people speak better.
Brilliant. Thank you. And last but by no means least, Louise, from the investor side.
So I wanted to pick up on a couple of things. So Ella mentioned that like finding the right investors is important, and I think we kind of use from our side for it as a selling point, right? One of our value added, hopefully, as an investor, is that we can help people stay on mission. We can help them stay aligned to the mission that they've set out, and if we're aligned with the founders on what that is, then we can kind of be another voice at the table, helping them to make those judgment calls about which revenue opportunities to take, which strategy decisions to take, and how that might impact on sustainability or business income or impact. So I think that's one of the ways that we can help support that mission alignment. And I mean, as an organization, our kind of mission alignment comes from being a registered charity and having, you know, all of the governance that goes with that, and our investment committee and things. But when we kind of convey that on to support the founders, I think having that, we often have a board observer seat, so we can kind of use that voice at the table to try and help support founders in those decisions as they go. We'll have some specific support, so we work with a consultant, Nick Andreu, who provides some impact support to our founders. So working on theory of change, working on marketing materials, working on pitch decks, and embedding impact into all of those materials. That's another way you can kind of thread it through everything that's going on. Then that helps to the whole thing to stay aligned. And then, as Andre said, having a board or a panel or a group of people who help inform those decisions as well. So we work with some ventures where they've got a user group that are an advisory board for them, that are a way of helping them to check whether they're making decisions in the interest of that group, whether the products, the changes, the features they're developing are likely to be useful, and kind of gives them a smaller group of people who can inform those decisions that they're making as they go along. So I think, you know, the same way that Andre's kind of academic advisory panel gives that robustness, you can have a group of users or beneficiaries as part of that process as well, and that can really help you stay aligned and check in with what you're doing.
Oh, that's great sound advice. And while we have you, Louise, maybe we can ask you the next question as well. And it's for the whole panel, but we're gonna dive a little deeper into, you know, how we collect the data. So Louise, I've got a question for you and the rest of the panel, which is around, so what type of impact data do you collect and why? And how do you plan, or if you plan to kind of evolve your approach in the future? How do you kind of iterate and kind of continue learning? And
so I can give a short version, but the long version is we published our interim impact report today. So on our website, resolutionfoundation.org/ventures, we've got a report which outlines all of our thinking on this, the lessons we're learning, how we try and think about impact for the ventures in our portfolio, as well as across the whole thing. So that's the long version. I think the impact data we collect, we try and align it a lot with what the ventures are trying to do. So there are two types of impact. As an investor, as a kind of investment program, there are two ways we can have impact. We can invest in companies that all do their thing and affect their users and have lots of impact. And then we can try and add up some version of like, we reached lots of people, they did stuff, they were all very different things, but we can kind of, but aggregating across those things is quite challenging. And we can do something around reach in there, but each venture is doing stuff in a different way. So we try and customize it a little bit. So some metrics might be quite common in terms of just reach, but we try and make it fairly bespoke to what they're doing and align it with something that the business cares about anyway. The metrics we want to collect are mostly ones that they want to collect anyway. They're going to be somewhere in the business, the management data as much as possible. So that's the kind of individual metrics. But then we're also trying as an investor to have a larger impact. So we want that group of individual ventures to all do great things, but also that to the sum to be greater than the individual parts, that we can tell a story about that impact as a whole, that influences institutions to change what they do, that makes employers change their behavior, that influences regulators to do regulation in the field of work differently, that potentially moves, you know, frontline delivery organizations to doing things differently, because we can demonstrate that different business models are viable, that treating your employees differently has a benefit. You know, we can take some of that evidence and deploy it elsewhere. So that's the other sort of impact we're looking for, and that's much more anecdotal. It's much more kind of story-based and qualitative, where we can see those things happening. But it's important to us to keep an eye on that horizon, as well as all of the individual progressions the ventures are making, because that's part of the overall picture of what we're doing.
That's great, and we'll look forward to kind of reading that. And for everyone on the call, there's a link in the chat to the report that Louise just mentioned. Yumi from BGV, Bethnal Green Ventures, from an investor side, how do we
do it? So we also collect a combination of quantitative and qualitative data. We base it on the impact management project 5 Dimensions, which I think I actually called Impact Frontiers now. Sorry, I keep using the old names. But so essentially the 5 dimensions are who, what, how much, contribution, and risk. So we collect data on most of those dimensions every quarter in our kind of usual reporting forms. So this would include what users our solutions are targeting, like how much change they're generating, both kind of from a scale perspective and from like the degree of change side as well. And then on a more like kind of annual basis, we also ask about what about some of the potential like impact risks? So what essentially might come in between the company achieving the desired kind of outcome? So this could be things like you know, the execution of a particular kind of service, or it could be external factors like the pandemic might suddenly interrupt all activities. So we just try to understand potential kind of risks, and we also, whenever possible, like on an annual basis, complement all of that data with qualitative stories from our portfolio's users. So we try to understand like what impact is actually happening on the ground, and yeah, we very much kind of encourage our companies and kind of proactively request kind of feedback and user research insights on an annual basis as well. Brilliant,
thank you. And also Dama's put something in the chat for attendees as well, just to help and give you some more information. Over to Andre. How about Beautiful Voice? What sort of impact data do you collect, and why, and what's the approach you've been taking? I know you've been doing some amazing deep research and you're quite early on in the stage, but it's good, I think, for everyone to hear at the different stages and where you're at and how you're doing it.
Yeah, so we right now collect 2 types of quite objective data, which are how much people are using our platform to do training, and that goes in line with our goal of increasing how much speech and language therapy people receive. In addition to that, we also have a number of metrics we capture in voice, speech, and language metrics, and we recently did a study where we looked how patients evolved in a 2-month period with those metrics, but these don't tell the whole story. So there are a few things that we still want to improve and see how that affects outside of when people are using our platform. So we're looking to improve our impact measurements through patient and caregiver perception of the improvement in daily life. So both from a personal self-assessment, saying, oh, I feel like I speak better, but also, can you do things that you didn't do before? I think that's really important for us to start capturing more. And also, we're also looking to measure improvement in productivity of speech and language therapists when they use the Beautiful Voice platform to complement their work. So the question is, can they treat more patients, or can they discharge them quicker? Are they reaching their goals quicker? So these are what we're doing right now and working on doing.
Great, thank you. Grant.
So we also collect quite obviously just objective data around use of our data and also for our API, but also through our interventions and how we disseminate our information. But we also, as I said, I think in the first sort of introduction, that we also really value more specific granular assessments on the actual sort of qualitative change that people perceive when they sort of see our interventions. So typically, for example, we do before and after change sort of assessments based on preference of commutes or walks or cycling events, and in terms of commute and alternative options, and that sort of quantifies how people experience their environment and how that affects their mental health and their well-being before and after the intervention. So we sort of use that more granular assessment in order to link to our more scalable and objective data collection. So for example, if we find a certain trend in terms of people are finding that this alternative, greener, quieter, less air polluted route is better for their well-being, then we translate that and say, well, in the app and the API calls, we've sort of produced 10,000 routes in Bristol, for example, and therefore that impact has potentially impacted 10,000 people. So we're sort of using very local specific studies to then scale up to objective data. But one of the other things that we also do quite regularly is sort of co-creation activities that kind of ensure that our data and information is clearly understood and actually does still communicate and translate sort of knowledge to our beneficiaries. So I think that's one key aspect that we've always done since the inception of our company, to make sure that we're doing that. But what we're now currently working on is how we can track and link these metrics to the UN SDGs, primarily about how do we focus our strategies on targeting areas of high risk or high need in cities, that can then mean that we can inform where our interventions are most potentially beneficial and impactful. And I think that's one of the key, it might be a big turning point this year in terms of how we're able to really demonstrate and focus where our impact is to specific beneficiaries in the highest need. So I think that's one key aspect that we're still learning, but I think it's really important for us.
Great, thank you. And Ella.
I can really relate to what Grant is saying about it taking some time to make sense, to be tracking your larger metrics like SDGs, etc. So one thing I would say is when you're starting out and maybe you're pre-product, it feels really important that you track all these impact metrics, but it's really hard to do so until you start doing stuff. I think it was, we couldn't figure any of this stuff out until we actually had product in the market, until we were actually running things. And then, now all of the kind of impact measurement jargon or kind of overwhelm starts to make sense. So if you haven't figured it out yet, don't worry. Like at the early stage, it's really difficult, and we're still figuring it out as we go. So we track quite a bit of different data, and it felt like at the beginning drinking from a fire hose, if you like. But the most important one for us is obviously quant and qual data about the impact we're having on our users. And we do that really basically from the beginning using just a Google form, where we're asking people, net promoter score questions, whether they would, whether they'd recommend, our training to their colleagues or other people. And then, we get them to, we give them some specific questions around the things they learned and the things that they intend to take away. We're just now starting to do sort of 3-month, 6-month follow-ups on that as well, to say, 3 months after the fact, 6 months after the fact, have you been in a dangerous environment? Did you use some of the techniques that we taught you? And in that way, we're hoping to show that what we're doing is actually more effective than the current training. But that's obviously, it takes a long time. And that speaks to another thing that happens with impact measurement, that it's a bit of a time trade-off, right? Like, you know, as a founder, you're doing a gazillion different things at once. And so taking the time to do things like following up 3 months after and 6 months after, you have to have processes in place, and you have to have a lot of support within your company to be able to do that. What else do we measure? We measure trainer feedback. So we have a cohort of people who deliver our training, and they also, we get feedback from them on how courses went, what lessons learned, so that we can, you know, feed that back into our impact and improve our product. And so we sort of, you know, as part of our objectives and key results in the company, we embed impact into one of those. So one of our larger objectives is that, you know, we're listening and responding to customers and users and trainers and people we're working with in order to make our training, or to hit our goals, which is to make training more accessible and in our target industries, etc. So as part of that objective, we then have key results within the team. So somebody's managing, you know, 360 feedback and how we interview, you know, do basic sort of user interviews on the ground. Somebody's looking at how we track all the data that we bring back in through the Google Forms, and somebody's looking at the data that we can get in the moment while people are being trained in VR. And when I say that's a bit like drinking from the fire hose, it is, because we can get a lot of different data points. So there's had to be a lot of work around what we collect, why we're collecting it, and how we're then communicating that to our different user groups. And that's a process, frankly, we're still figuring out and we're still working on. And we've made a bit of a deliberate decision to just do it step by step. So in the beginning, you know, focus on one particular data set, have people spotted threats in a particular scenario, communicate that to users, communicate that to trainers, and then look at the impact of teaching them that over time, if that makes sense.
Makes total sense. We've got, thank you for sharing all. I'm going to bring all the panelists back up on screen, and we're going to take some questions from the chat. So while I do that, if a member of the team could pull out some questions from the chat. We've got a few minutes left, so I'm going to pin everyone up here.
I mean, just to pick up on what Ella was just saying about the stage that you're at and the impacts you gather, I think it's really important to not try too hard to like build up this whole suite of impact metrics at a really early stage. If your product is still pivoting and developing really rapidly, trying to pin impact metrics on top of that is really hard and just pointless. It's more a question of like, what experiment are you running? What are you testing at that point with that iteration? Is there an impact dimension to that? Then great. But until that settles, as Ella said, then bolting a bunch of impact metrics on top is really hard. So that really early experimental stage where you're just testing, it's more a question of like, how do we know this is working? How do we know this is doing the thing we wanted it to do in the first place? And is there something we can measure to tell that that's happening? And then once you've got something that's stable and you're scaling it, then you can to build other stuff on top.
Oh, that's great advice. Thank you. Dama, have you seen any questions in there that we could pull out? I'm just going through the chat here as well.
Someone
I think
have dedicated impact officers. No, not at our stage. We don't. I think we'd probably need to get to beyond Series A before we had a dedicated impact officer. And I think that really speaks to the push-pull that we've already mentioned here, that, you know, time spent on tracking impact is time away from generating revenue or something else that you're doing. So I think you need to be really strategic about it. It would be great if we had an impact officer. That's a salary. And we need salespeople, and we need trainers, and we need everything else. So at the moment, no, we don't have an impact officer, but it would be great if we did. And if anyone wants to do it for us for free, that'd be great.
I think just to add to Alice, obviously we don't have an impact officer, but I think it's important when you're growing your team to have people who have an alignment of the direction you have, and to be transparent with them. So you end up having more people who are contributing and questioning you when you're not targeting your goals properly.
We have a question here probably from the founder for the founders here, which is, do you involve the beneficiary or customer of the startup or in your startup in the process of defining the metrics?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good idea. In our case, we involved the people that we were selling to, because they were pretty clear on the kind of change that they wanted to see, and that then helps with your sales process. But we also involve the end beneficiaries. Like, you know, we ask people at the beginning of courses, what's the change you would like to see in yourself going forward, and that really helps them to then love the product and make it more sticky.
Just from our perspective, the beneficiaries, because we don't sell services to the beneficiaries, it's quite a clear-cut difference between clients, users, and beneficiaries. So we initially track our impact to beneficiaries who are, again, don't buy our product, but then we in terms of the users, we also work with them. So for example, our API users, we work with them to really integrate and sort of, as you were saying, Ella, about the understanding of what they're really trying to get out of the relationship between using our services, so then we can really track that metrics in terms of how much they use our products, and then how that then goes to their beneficiaries as well. So we're trying a form that might actually is B to B to C, essentially, that will essentially look at our network effects of how our integrations can essentially provide benefits to other people's beneficiaries too.
Any more? We have a question from Meryl Yang here around IMM. I think Dharma has put a resource into the chat for that. We've got another question here for investors. Are all the investment team equipped with impact measurement capabilities, or do you have the impact team and the investment team separately?
I can answer that. We actually, everyone in our team is equipped with impact measurement capabilities. We don't think it's the role of any one person necessarily to be measuring impact, because I think that can sometimes mean that it gets sidelined and it's a bit more of a like add-on rather than something that's actually like integral to your business. So we have, you know, some people who lead on kind of particular projects, but everyone essentially understands like BGV's impact methodology, how we measure things, and takes ownership of various elements kind of within their roles. I don't know, Louise, if that's something that...
Yeah, well, there are only 3 of us, so no, we don't have anyone separate the impact bit out, because there wouldn't be enough people. But we did bring in some, we're working with an external consultant to give us some extra capability to do that. In terms of support around impact that we just like struggle to have time to do. But no, everybody in the team understands what we're trying to aim for, what those KPIs are, and then depending on who's having most regular calls with the founders, they'll be following up on what's going on with those different types of impact.
Amazing, that's great. So we've got a minute left, which is like perfect timing. Everyone can get on with their day after this. I just wanted to let everyone know that this has been recorded. We'll also be putting this out with resources that have been mentioned, reports and other kind of impact measurement resources out, and we'll be circulating them around. So keep an eye out on the socials, and hope to all see you at the next Ask Me Anything BGV AMA, which should be in the next quarter. So I'd like to thank all of the panelists for your time, your sharing your experience. It's been totally invaluable. I'm sure everyone would agree. And I wish you all a great weekend.
Thank
Bye.
you.